Hey there. So welcome to the deep dive. This is where we really roll up our sleeves, take that stack of information you've shared with us, all the research, the notes, and we'll dig in. We're looking for those key insights, the things that maybe aren't obvious at first glance, to help you get truly informed fast.
Exactly, getting beneath the surface.
And today we're diving into something, frankly, quite sobering. It's emerging from a place often called God's own country, Kerala, in India. Beautiful place, known for progress, high literacy.
Yeah.
You know the picture.
Mm-hmm.
But the information you sent over, it paints a different, a much more difficult reality hiding there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite a stark collection of material, isn't it? Really forces us to challenge some of those, well, common perceptions about Kerala. So our mission today is to unpack these details, try to grasp the scope of the issue, and figure out what it tells us about the challenges that can, persist even in places really celebrated for their development.
It means looking past the headlines, really.
Definitely. Past the
Yeah.
glossy images.
Right. And the core focus today is these recent findings about child labor hotspots, actual locations identified across Kerala,
Yeah.
and the efforts being made right now to rescue kids.
Mm.
We'll get into the numbers, the places, the stories behind them, and this ongoing fight.
Yeah.
It's a topic that grabs you right away.
It really does.
So let's jump right in, because the info you shared starts with a real wake-up call.
Yeah.
A specific date,
Yeah.
June 14th, 2025, just now. And on that date, it seems 140 places were officially identified across Kerala as hotbeds for child labor. Think about that, 140 distinct spots.
That number, 140.
Yeah.
It really hits hard, especially given Kerala's reputation, like you said, high literacy, good healthcare, often ahead of other states. So finding 140 locations where kids are being exploited,
It's a huge contrast.
it is. And this wasn't some quiet internal report. This identification on June 14th, it sounds like it was a pretty major announcement. It really pulled back the curtain on a hidden problem, maybe on a scale that challenges that carefully built image. It just underscores that even in highly developed places, these deep vulnerabilities can really stick around.
And right alongside that number, 140 hotspots, comes the immediate human cost.
Mm.
56 children
Mhm.
rescued from these conditions around that same time. And we're not talking about, teenagers doing a summer job. The details are clear. Kids, some as young as 10,
Hmm.
10 years old, pulled out of really difficult, often dangerous situations.
Situations no child should ever face. It's heartbreaking to even think about.
Okay, so that's the statewide picture,
Yeah.
140 hotspots. But when you look at where this is most concentrated, the information gets really specific. It points overwhelmingly to one area, Ernakulam district.
Ernakulam, yeah.
That's the place with the most identified hotspots. It's a big economic hub, right? Very busy, lots of activity. And that very activity, it seems, is kind of attracting this problem.
Yeah, and the material we looked at tries to explain why Ernakulam specifically. It connects it directly to that economic pulse. You've got busy workshops, lots of small-scale industry, often informal, roadside eateries, dabas, they're often called, serving lots of people, including migrant workers, and scrapyards, big ones.
Like places needing cheap labor.
Exactly. Places where cheap, exploitable labor is in high demand. And the role of migration comes up strongly, too. Many of these kids, the sources suggest, are from really impoverished families. Often migrants coming from other states, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, were mentioned hoping for better opportunities, but finding themselves struggling financially when they arrive. Their kids become vulnerable.
And the work itself, the descriptions are grim. It's not simple stuff. Kids found in scrapyards, imagine the fumes, the dangers, working in small, maybe unsafe industries, long hours in restaurants, or selling things on the street.
Grueling jobs. They don't just steal their energy day to day. They steal their education, their health, their entire childhood, really.
Yeah. And then there's this detail about employers trying to cheat the system using fake IDs.
Mm-hmm. That was mentioned. A really disturbing tactic. Trying to pass off underage kids as adults using falsified documents. It shows it's not just negligence, it's, deliberate evasion of the law. Authorities are aware of it, trying to tackle it, but it highlights how calculated this exploitation can be.
Calculated cruelty, really. But, okay, action is being taken. That's the other side of this. The information talks about a big statewide crackdown. Happened right around June 12th, 2025. Timed, it seems, deliberately for the World Day Against Child Labor.
Right, a coordinated push. It involved key departments, the Women and Child Development Department, the WCD, and the local district child protection units, the DCPUs, working together.
And they targeted specific areas.
Yes, very targeted, focusing on known problem zones. The Thiruvananthapuram, Kochi, and it's especially hitting Ernakulam hard. Going after those sectors, the auto workshops, the small eateries, the dabas, places where they had intelligence that children were likely working.
And that specific operation, it had results. Those 56 children we mentioned, they were pulled out during that crackdown, placed in care homes, or, if it was safe and possible, reunited with families.
Which is huge, a vital first step.
Right.
But, and this came through really strongly in the material, rescuing them is just the first step.
Right. What happens now?
Exactly. The real ongoing battle is making sure these kids don't just end up back in the same or similar situations a few weeks or months later. That need for consistent follow-up, for support, checking in, making sure they get into school, it was flagged as absolutely critical. Otherwise, the cycle just continues.
So 56 rescued recently. That's positive, but it sounds like the tip of the iceberg. The information suggests the actual number of kids affected across Kerala is still likely in the thousands.
Yeah, that seems to be the underlying assessment, and it helps to see this in the bigger picture, nationally. There was a 2023 report mentioned that cast doubt on India meeting its goal to eliminate child labor by 2025. It pointed back to older data, the 2011 census, showing millions of kids working across India then, many in hazardous jobs.
So Kerala's struggle is part of a much larger national challenge.
Absolutely. It's a systemic issue across the country. And what we're seeing in Kerala is its local manifestation, even with all the state's progress in other areas.
And Kerala's own past data shows this isn't brand new, right? Even between 2018 and 2019, they rescued, 142 children?
That's right. So while identifying 140 hotspots now on June 14th, 2025, highlights a really concentrated problem currently, it's a reminder that this is a persistent fight they've been engaged in, not something that just suddenly appeared.
Which brings us to the big question. Why? Why does this persist, especially in a place like Kerala? What are the roots?
The analysis we saw points to a few key things, all tangled together. Poverty is, of course, the bedrock issue, always is. But then there are the specific migration dynamics, people coming from poorer states, often lacking support networks, struggling financially. Their children become extremely vulnerable.
Desperate situations.
Exactly. And then there's the enforcement piece, or the lack of consistent enforcement. That allows the exploitation to happen or happen again.
And for the families themselves, it sounds like a terrible choice. The material suggested that for many parents, sending a child to work isn't what they want, but feels like a necessity, just to survive.
A heartbreaking reality, a grim necessity, as you said. That economic desperation creates the vulnerability.
Which is then exploited. And that connects back to enforcement weaknesses you mentioned. Inspections being described as sporadic.
Yeah, sporadic, not regular or predictable enough to act as a real deterrent. And crucially, follow-ups after an initial rescue or warning were described as rare. If employers know no one's really checking back consistently, it's harder to stop them from just starting again once the immediate attention fades. Makes sustained progress really difficult.
But there are laws against this. India does have child labor laws on the books.
Oh, absolutely. There's a legal framework. The Child Labor Act of 1986, for instance. It's meant to ban employing kids under 14, especially in hazardous work. And there are penalties.
But maybe not strong enough penalties. The information seemed to suggest that.
That was definitely a point raised. Fines can be quite low. One figure mentioned was around Rs 20,000. For a business profiting from cheap labor, that might not be much of a deterrent, just a cost of doing business.
And not enough to make it stop.
Right. And a 2023 report actually called for much stronger measures, things like potentially canceling business licenses, maybe even seizing property, things with real financial teeth to make employers think twice or 3 times.
Okay. But despite the challenges with enforcement, there are groups fighting this on the ground.
Yes, definitely. It's not just one agency, it's a coalition. The DCPUs, the local child protection units, Childline, the Helpline, national bodies like the NCPCR, the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, local committees, and important NGOs like Bakhao and Dolan was mentioned. They're all involved in trying to identify, rescue, and support these kids.
And we saw examples of their work making a difference. That story of the 17-year-old rescued from a shop in Thiruvananthapuram's Chala market back in 2022.
That shows these targeted operations do happen. They do find kids, and it often requires multiple groups coordinating.
Because beyond the numbers, the laws, the statistics, it's the human stories that really hit home, isn't it? The material included some incredibly specific, poignant examples.
They're essential to understanding the real impact, like those 2 boys, 12 and 14 years old, rescued in 2023 near a temple, Pazavangadi Temple, selling kumkum powder. They were from Uttar Pradesh, so far from home, so young.
Just kids.
Yeah. And there was mention of infants found with their mothers being used for begging in Thiruvananthapuram. And the sources also touched on the psychological side, the trauma children face being separated from families, or just the trauma of the work itself instead of being in school, being cared for.
It really makes you pause. These aren't statistics. They're individual children.
Mm.
Their health, their dreams, their basic right to just be a kid, it's all being stolen.
Systematically stolen by poverty and exploitation.
So looking ahead,
Yeah.
beyond the rescues, what's being done now? What are the next steps?
Well, Kerala is taking steps. That reward system from the WCDR's 2500 for tip-offs about child labor that's aimed at getting the public involved, encouraging reporting.
Using eyes and ears on the ground.
Exactly. And there are plans for increased surveillance, keeping a closer watch on those 140 identified hotspots. Interestingly, even schools flagged for other issues, like potential drug problems, are getting more scrutiny. It suggests a broader focus on any location where children might be vulnerable.
And nationally, what about support after rescue?
National groups like the NCPCR are pushing for stronger laws, yes, but also, crucially, for better rehabilitation. Not just rescue, but what comes next. Things like scholarships to get kids back into education, vocational training to give older kids usable skills, and counseling to help them deal with the trauma. A 2024 UNICEF report on Kerala specifically emphasized needing strong monitoring systems to prevent this stuff in the first place.
Which brings it back to, well, back to you, the listener,
Mm-hmm.
because the material didn't just describe the problem. It had a clear call to action. This isn't just for governments or NGOs.
Mm-hmm. It emphasized that everyone can play a part.
So let's try and wrap this up. The key takeaway from this deep dive. This discovery on June 14th, 2025, 140 child labor hotspots identified in Kerala, 56 kids rescued through it, really exposes a hidden, significant challenge in a state known for its progress.
A real paradox.
Yeah. Ernakulam stands out as the epicenter, fueled by economic activity and migration, with kids, some incredibly young, found in really tough, dangerous jobs. And while there are laws and dedicated people fighting this,
Persistent poverty, the pressures of migration, and gaps in enforcement, the problem continues. And the human cost revealed in those individual stories is just devastating.
and that call to action we mentioned, it's pretty direct in the source material. You can make a difference. Keep your eyes open.
Exactly. If you see a child working who looks too young, report it. That reward system in Kerala exists for a reason. They want people to speak up. And supporting the NGOs doing the vital work on the ground, the rescue, the rehabilitation, that's highlighted as another concrete way to help.
It leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? What does true progress actually look like? If even in a place celebrated for its achievements, this hidden issue of child labor exists, what does that tell us about who gets left behind?
A powerful question.
And maybe, how can we as individuals, as communities, help make sure that the benefits of development, the safety, the opportunities, how can we help make sure they reach every single child? Give them the chance, the childhood they deserve.
Definitely something to reflect on.
It is. Well, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us. Keep learning, keep asking those questions. We'll see you next time.